Chapter 18: The Market for the Factors of Production. Our focus in this chapter is to answer these questions. What determines a competitive firm's demand for labor? How does labor supply depend on wage? What other factors affect labor supply? How do various events affect the equilibrium wage and employment of labor? How are the equilibrium prices and quantities of other inputs determined? Ask the experts. On immigration, the average US citizen would be better off if a large number of highly educated foreign workers were legally allowed to immigrate to the US each year, and 95% of economists agree. 5% uncertain. Migration of foreign educated workers is a good thing. Factors of production and factor markets. What are factors of production? These are the inputs used to produce goods and services, and they include labor, land, capital, the equipment and structures used to produce goods and services. Prices and quantities are determined by supply and demand in factor markets. Derived demand. Markets for factors of production are like markets for goods and services, except the demand for factor of production is a derived demand, derived from the firm's decision to supply a good in another market. Two assumptions are made here. Number one, all markets are competitive. The typical firm is a price taker in the market for the product it produces and in the market for labor. And the second assumption, firms care only about maximizing profits, and that each firm's supply of output and demand for inputs are derived from this goal. For example, Farmer Jack. So Farmer Jack sells wheat in a perfectly competitive market. He hires workers in a perfectly competitive market, labor market. When deciding how many workers to hire, Farmer Jack maximizes profit by thinking at the margin. If the benefit from hiring another worker exceeds the cost, Jack will hire that worker. Cost of hiring another worker is the wage rate, the price of labor. Benefits of hiring another worker: Jack can produce and sell more wheat, increasing his revenue. The size of this benefit depends on Jack's production function, and that's the relationship between the quantity of inputs used to make a good and the quantity of output of that good. So this is Jack's production function. If Jack hires 0 labor, he produces 0 wheat. If he hires 1 person, produces 1,000. Hires 2 people, production goes to 1,800, and then to 2,400, and then to 2,500. And 5 people hired will produce 3,000. And that is the production function that we have seen before. Marginal product of labor, MPL. The marginal product of labor, or the MPL, is delta Q over delta L or the change in output divided by the change in input. The increase in the amount of output from an additional unit of labor, where delta Q is change in output, delta L is change in input. Problem: cost of hiring another worker, which is wage rate, is measured in dollars. The benefit of hiring another worker, marginal product of labor, is measured in units of output. What is the solution? Convert MPL to dollars. And that is the value of the marginal product. Value of marginal product is the price of output multiplied by the marginal product of labor. Okay? The marginal product of an input times the price of the output. Computing marginal product of labor and the value of the marginal product. Assuming the price is $5 per bushel, find MPL and VMPL, fill them in the blank spaces of the table, then graph a curve with VMPL on the vertical axis and L on the horizontal axis. So, Farmer Jack's production function exhibits diminishing marginal product. As you can see, marginal product goes from 1,000 to 800 to 600 to 200, as we saw in previous chapters. So marginal product falls as labor increases. This property is common in just about every production. The value of the marginal product, which is marginal product of labor multiplied by $5. So 1,000 times $5 is 5,000. Produce 800, sell it for 4,000. Produce 600, sell it for 3,000. Produce 400, sell it for 2,000. So that is the value of the marginal product. It's marginal product times the price. And when that marginal product is plotted, it is downward sloping, which of course reflects diminishing marginal product. So if that is the value of the marginal product, and Farmer Jack is trying to decide how many people to hire, so suppose wage rate or wages is $2,500 per week. How many workers should Jack hire? As you can see, the answer 3. Why 3? At any smaller L, maybe 2, maybe 1, increase profit by hiring another worker. As you can see, at one person, value of the marginal product is up here, almost 4,500. What you're paying him is 2,500. What it is telling you, hire the second person. You hire the second person, the value of the marginal product is still higher than cost. Hire the third person. And by the time you get to the third person, these two things are equal. And that's where you stop. At any larger L or labor, increase profit by hiring one few worker. So for example, if you hire 4 people, the fourth person, this is the margin, the value of the marginal product, and this is what you're paying him or her. That means you're better off getting rid of this fourth person. Profit will be maximized where the value of the marginal product is equal to the wage rate. For any competitive profit maximizing firm, to maximize profits, hire workers up to the point where the value of the marginal product is equal to the wage rate. The VMPL curve is the labor demand curve. Labor demand curve is exactly equal to the VMPL, or the value of the marginal product curve. And VMPL, as we have seen, is calculated as the price of the output times the marginal product of labor. Anything that increases the price of the output or increases marginal product of labor at each level of employment will increase the value of the marginal product and will shift the labor demand curve upwards to the right. Things that shift the labor demand curve: changes in output price, technological change that affects marginal product of labor, the supply of other factors that affect marginal product of labor. For example, if farm gets more equipment, that is capital, then workers will be more productive. The marginal product of labor and the value of the marginal product will rise. Labor demand shifts upward. Input demand and output supply. Marginal cost, MC. Marginal cost is the cost of producing an additional unit of output. Marginal cost is calculated as delta TC over delta Q, change in total cost over the change in output, where TC is the total cost. So suppose wages is 2,500, marginal product of labor is 500 bushels. If Farmer Jack hires another worker, delta TC, or change in total cost, is 2,500. Delta Q, or change in output, is 500 bushels. Marginal cost is 2,500 divided by 500, or $5 per bushel. In general, marginal cost is equal to the ratio of the wage rate over the marginal product of labor. To produce additional output, hire more labor. As labor rises, marginal product of labor falls, causing the ratio of the wage rate to the value of the marginal product to rise, causing marginal cost to rise, hence diminishing marginal product and increasing marginal cost are two sides of the same coin. The competitive farms rule for demanding labor is the price times marginal product of labor equals the wage rate. If you divide both sides by MPL, then P is equal to W over MPL. Substitute MC equals W over MPL from a previous slide, and you find P equals MC. This is the competitive farms rule for supplying output. Hence, input demand and output supply are two sides of the same coin. Labor supply. Trade-off between work and leisure. The more time you spend working, the less time you have leisure. Wage is the opportunity cost of leisure. Let's look at labor supply curve. It is upward sloping. An increase in wages is an increase in the opportunity cost of leisure. People respond by taking less leisure and working more, taking advantage of higher wages. So when wages increase, people go to work. L goes from L1 to L2. Things that shift the labor supply curve: changes in tastes or attitudes regarding the labor-leisure trade-off, changes in alternative opportunities, immigration, that's the movement of workers from region to region or country to country, equilibrium in the labor market. The wage adjusts to balance supply and demand for labor. The wage always equals the value of the marginal product. Ask the experts regarding immigration. The average US citizen would be better off if a larger number of low skilled foreign workers were legally allowed to enter the US each year. 63% of economists agree, 27 are uncertain, 10% disagree. Active learning. Number 2, changes in labor market equilibrium. In each of the following scenarios, use a diagram of the market for domestic auto workers to find the effect on their wage and employment. Number A, baby boomers who worked in the auto industry retire. Number B, car buyers' preferences shift towards imported autos. Number C, technological progress boosts productivity in the auto manufacturing industry. Answer. The retirement of baby boomer auto workers shift supply leftwards, as you can see, and that will result in wages increasing and number of people working decreasing. What about a fall in the demand for US autos reduces the price? As you can see, demand for autos decline, wages decline, and people hired decline. Okay. And at each level, the last one, at each L, MPL rises due to technological progress. Demand increases, wages rise, and more people are hired. VMPL rises, labor demand curve shifts upward, wages and labor hiring increase. Productivity and wage growth in the United States. Recall one of the 10 principles. A country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. Our theory here implies wages are tied to labor productivity. And this is reflected in the data. Let's look at the data. Between 1960 and 2015, there was 2% growth in productivity, and there was growth rate in real wages was 1.8%. 1960 to 1973, growth rate was 2.7 in productivity, and growth rate in wages was 2.7. 1973 to 95, productivity grew by 1.4, wages grew by 1.2%. 95 to 2015, productivity grew by 2.1%, wages grew by 1.8%. So there's a correlation. As productivity increases, wages increase. Monopsony. Monopsony is a market with one buyer. Monopsony employer can use its market power to increase its profits by paying lower wages. As with monopoly, economic activity under monopsony is below the socially optimal level, causing a deadweight loss. Monopsonies are rare in the real world. With land and capital, we must distinguish between purchase price, the price a person pays to own that factor indefinitely, and rental price, the price a person pays to use that factor for a limited period of time. The wage is the rental price of labor. The determination of the rental price. is analogous to the determination of wages. How the rental price of land is determined is a market for land. That's the demand for land. Farms increase the quantity of land to rent until the value of the marginal product or VMP of land equals the land's rental price. The rental price of land adjusts to balance supply and demand for land. What about capital market? How the rental price of capital is determined. Firms increase the quantity of capital to rent until the value of the marginal product, VMP, of capital equals the capital's rental price. And the rental price of capital adjusts to balance supply and demand for that capital. Rental and purchase prices. Buying a unit of capital or land yields a stream of rental income. The rental income in any period equals the value of the marginal product. Hence, the equilibrium purchase price of a factor depends on both the current VMP and the VMP expected to prevail in future periods. Linkages among factors of production. Factors of production are used together in a way that makes each factor's productivity dependent on the quantities of other factors. Example, an increase in the quantity of capital, the marginal product, and the rental price of capital fall. Having more capital makes workers more productive, value of the marginal product of labor and wage rates will rise. In conclusion, let's remember the neoclassical theory of income distribution, the theory developed in this chapter. Factor prices are determined by supply and demand. Each factor is paid the value of its marginal product, used by most economists as a starting point for understanding the distribution of income. Ask the experts on immigration. Unless they were compensated by others, many low-skilled American workers would be substantially worse off if a larger number of low-skilled foreign workers were legally allowed to enter the United States each year. And 60% agree, 29% are uncertain, 11% disagree. In summary, the economy's income distribution is determined by the markets for the factors of production. The three most important factors of production are labor, land, and capital. A farm's demand for a factor is derived from its supply of output. Competitive farms maximize profit by hiring each factor up to the point where the value of the marginal product equals its rental price. The supply of labor arises from the trade-off between work and leisure, yields an upward sloping labor supply curve. The price paid to each factor adjusts to balance supply and demand for that factor. In equilibrium, each factor is compensated according to its marginal contribution to production. Factors of production are used together. A change in the quantity of one factor affects the marginal product and equilibrium earnings of all factors.